Hi there, I'm Jill Chivers from Shop Your Wardrobe and 16 Style Types.
And I'm Imogen Lamport from Inside Out Style and 16 Style Types. Today, we wanted to talk about having a future-focused wardrobe. Now, this is something that some people think more about and others never have occurred to them in their entire lives. But it is one of those things that I always think about when we think about our wardrobe. Everything in our wardrobe is based on the past because everything in there, we bought it at some time in the past. And whether or not we still need it in our wardrobe. So maybe it's based on the future, where we're going in our lives. I always think our wardrobe wants to be helping us get what we want out of life. So if we have goals, if we have even just, these are some things, some vague ideas of things we may want in our lives, it's still worthwhile thinking about do I have the wardrobe that's going to assist me to get to where I want to go?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing idea because I am one of those people that do not think in future focused terms. I often think in past focused terms. How is the past helping me to deal with the present? And how might it help me to inform the future? So it's a bit almost a lens through which I navigate time and decisions that I'm going to make. And there are others of a similar personality type to mine. I would hazard a guess that other SJs have a similar kind of approach, maybe other Js, but particularly SJs. And maybe SPs have a not quite the same, but that sensing element of tangible concreteness, which informs how they approach life. When I think about big mistakes I've made in my wardrobe, it's often not about I'm thinking about a future life and how my style is going to serve me. It's about an imagined life in the future when I am a director of films, or when I live in New York City, or it's something that's not exactly ridiculous, but it's not even a dream. It's a fantasy. Is it even a fantasy? It's certainly not anchored to reality or any pathway that I am on. So I haven't made what I would call a gazillion, high cost mistakes in my wardrobe, but I've sure made my fair share of them. And I look at some of them and I think that's for a fantasy imagined life. And so for me, this is where this future focused thing can be a bit fraught. I think it's powerful, but I have to be careful with it so that it is actually, I kind of almost have to take it in bite-sized pieces. Otherwise, I get overwhelmed by it. And I can't use it properly. Whereas I think there are other types that are naturally inclined that way. When they make decisions with this orientation towards time, they're sound, they're inspired. They're at their most stylish self when they're leaning into the future. And I think this is another great, we've talked about our 16 Style Types house as having a wraparound veranda. Well, this is another window that you can look in and we see different things.
Yes. And it's what is the future to you? Because so your future probably either it's some, fantasy imagined future. And it's so funny you talking about that because it just immediately brought to mind an experience I had very early on in my image consulting career where I went shopping with this young woman who lived in a West Australian mining town. So I can only imagine a lot of red dirt was in the atmosphere of where she lived. And she was the mother of a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So life is pretty practical when you have kids of that age, when you live in a small mining town. And one of the things she bought, not at my recommendation, I was like going, are you sure about this? Was a white silk dress.
Right.
And I am not sure what she was imagining where she would wear this, but I felt like this is a fantasy item. This is for a fantasy lifestyle that kind of I don't really have at this time. And it's funny because
I may never have.
And may never have. But I think she had some sort of fantasy idea of somehow swanning about at a garden party or I don't know what in her white silk dress.
Somewhere with grass, perhaps.
Yes, with grass, not red dirt. But it was something because I remember thinking, why on earth is she buying this? Like everything she told me about her lifestyle and what she wanted. She talked about, I need practical clothes. I've got, babies. I'm a mum of young kids. I'm at home. I live in a mining town. Like everything she told me, she was saying, I need practical, practical, practical. And yet fantasy white dress appears as something that she ends up, really desiring highly.
Yeah, and I mean, this is where a style can go very, very deep because, I mean, there's the surface level of that story, which is that item makes no sense for the life that she's living now. Then you go a little bit deeper and you really can go very deep. Style can go right to our sense of identity, how we feel about our lives, what we're happy with, what we're unhappy with, what our aspirations are, what we feel our accomplishments are. We've all heard of imposter syndrome. Sometimes style can tap into a sense of, I want to be somebody that I'm not, which is what imposter syndrome is, related to, that I'm wearing a mask. And at any time that mask could be ripped off and the real horrible, revolting me will be revealed to the world. And so I cover it up. And so when you think about all the various elements and somebody buying an item of clothing so clearly out of step with her current reality, it's an invitation, whether accepted or not, to explore those deeper things about, what's going well in her life and what isn't and what she's unhappy about. And so it really style can go to the absolute core of who we are. And so, we think we're talking about future focused wardrobes, and we are, but we're actually going really deep into what motivates us and what represents psychological comfort, what represents psychological challenge, and what represents psychological pain to us. Because sometimes we do want our style to challenge us. It's important. It propels us forward when we're challenged. But then we reach a point where it's no longer a stretch and we're actually hurting, or it's not serving us, or it's taking us backwards. And, these are all fascinating elements to think about because there is no one definition fits everybody in exactly the same way. I think of the N types, the 8 types with N in their type code, as having a more natural orientation towards the future. NP's different to NJ's, but nevertheless, this sense of where I am now is not necessarily my ultimate frame of reference. And as an intuitive, I'm sure you live this idea of how the future is part of your present. Well, yeah. I'm guessing
it is, and in fact, it's so part of my present. It's very hard to stop and actually appreciate when I've achieved anything. Like that's one of I think the biggest things I notice is like the minute some goal is ticked off, I'm already onto the next. I find it very hard to ever stop and go, oh, that was great that I did that. Like I'm already on to the next thing in the future. And I think when I think about wardrobe in that way, it's always like, well, what are my goals? And are these things that are taking me towards the me I am now and when I'm going into the future, rather than the me I was in the past? And thinking about future focused is a really interesting thing. If we're thinking about, should I keep it or should I let it go in my wardrobe?
Yeah.
Now, Jill's got an amazing blog post about 36 ways to color your closet, of which one of the questions is, can I imagine wearing it in the future? Yeah. And for me, as an intuitive type who lives in the future, this is a really important question, because just because I've worn it in the past and maybe it's been a great article, but it may not be the me of where I'm going now. And so for me, it's and I may not have worn it for a while, but I can still imagine wearing it again. But there'll be other things I think, no, it's just not me anymore. I've moved on from that version of me to a new version of me, or it's starting to emerge, this new version of me. It may not be fully, realized yet.
Can you talk a little bit more, because this is so fascinating and so different to how I do things. Can you talk a little bit more about this future version of yourself? And is it like, what's that like? Is that a picture? Is it a feeling? Like how does that show up? I don't even know the words to use to try and describe it. I'm trying to put boundaries. I'm trying to like touch it and feel it. But talk a little more about that.
Like most things, it's not a real it's always a fuzzy picture, never a for me, which very rarely is it a solid picture. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'd like to be standing on a TED stage and, but I haven't got the exact picture is never quite there. But it is, I think there's a lot of feeling in there in a way. It's it's almost like I think a shedding of skins in a way where we've kind of gone, that's who I was. But particularly if I think about maybe we're more like goal, that sort of goal focused in a different way. I'm sure, senses have their own way of thinking about goals. But there is something about the me I need to be to achieve that goal may not be the me that I was when I achieved something else. And so in some ways, I think it's an aspirational version of me. I absolutely cannot picture it specifically, but it's definitely much more feeling related. In that way, and like most of my things, it's a little bit fuzzy, but I'll know it when I see it. And I think that's, and particularly as an NJ type, which is the knowing without knowing, there is a lot of it is I know it when I see it, and I know it's either right, I know it's wrong, and I don't have to think too much about it.
That's so fascinating. Very, very different to how I approach things. But other NJs we've worked with report similar things. And Jane, our co-founder of 16 Style Types, preference for INFJ. I know I've been shopping with her. I went shopping with her to help choose a piece of jewelry to go with an outfit to her son's wedding. It was a casual outdoor wedding in the American summer. And we spent over an hour in this particular store in Melbourne. And consulting with Jane on that was a really informative and a really quite a beautiful experience, because it was not clear to her. She had a broad sense there was a color scheme in mind, but everything else was sort of open. And it was a very fluid kind of thing. And so I had to check some of my natural tendencies to bring things to conclusion. Right, not doing these, but we are doing that, which I would do. Right, let's take these 6 things out. Which was like, no, I don't think we do want to take those 6 things out necessarily. We might not. So I was checking some of my natural things, but this sense of sort of moving through the possibilities. And what Jane has done in other parts of her life is she has nailed some things down, because this navigating through has taught her things like no satin, no sequins, no frills, nothing shiny. So she has, through this process, put some concrete definition, I think, out of frustration from having to compress the time frame to make some decisions, either shopping, packing, getting ready for events, curating a wardrobe. So she's almost she's introduced things that are not a natural tendency for an NJ to make her style life work better.
Yeah.
And I think that's that whole idea of it's not clear, but I know it, is really a hallmark of NJs.
I think too, we can often have criteria. So some of her criteria, and that's from experience, where she's gone, every time I've tried the ruffles or the frills, I just don't feel good. So she's gone, that's now, I've tried it, not me. And so I think that's when you can start to nail down what it's not, but she hasn't nailed down what it is.
Apart from her color palette, which she got from
the color palette. But that's the thing is, the rest of it's still a little bit. It's like the mist hasn't cleared yet. And I know that Sue Blair talks about
ESTJ style muse.
Yes. But also she's a great type practitioner, and she will talk about the introverted intuition, which is the sort of intuition that NJ types have. She describes it as a mist clearing. You're on a road, there's a fog, the fog clears and the picture becomes real. And in many ways, that is what it feels like. Or like you've got the crystal ball, it's all cloudy and then it clears, but you don't know. You'll know the picture when when the fog is cleared, absolutely, you know it. But you sometimes don't know what the picture is going to be until that fog has cleared.
Yeah. And then we think about our other 4 intuitive types that are NPs, and often the metaphor is shooting stars or fireworks or popcorn or bouncing balls, or this sense of multiple opportunities options popping in the external world. So this is what we're seeing. So it manifests quite differently. All intuitives are not the same. So yes, there is that sense of future focus, which we see with both of those. But when it comes to style, we see a convergence with our NJs, and with our NPs, the opposite direction. And it can result in this sense of a style that you can't see a consistent through line. It looks really different in its natural form or in its consciously chosen form, which is why we see some NPs bringing it in. They have learned that all of those options can actually not serve them when it comes to curating a wardrobe, deciding what to let go, because it can be quite time consuming. It can be energy lifting, but it's not efficient. And if efficiency becomes part of the equation, I actually need to get out of the house in, a short period of time. I need to be able to pack so that everything fits into one suitcase, etc., etc. Then having a refined sense of discerned choices is helpful, but it's not the natural landscape in which NPs flourish, and it's not the thing that NPs tend to gift us when we are in interaction with us.
Yeah. And I know from working with NP clients that often wardrobe editing can be really hard because, even with clothes that are the wrong size and are maybe a 10 years old already or something, and you're not going to fit back into them until another 2 or 3 years, you've got that, like you may never fit back into them. But there's always the possibility that maybe one day I will. And it's the possibilities of that. Maybe I want to, maybe I'll get invited, and I've had NP clients to me, but I might get invited to a dress up party where I have to wear, this thing could be a great part of that costume.
Yeah. Right.
So there's always a lot of possibilities outside the kind of normal everyday in a way that may come up, which can make it very hard. And this is where I think, but even then, when I've been working them, when they actually start to nail down their own criteria, it becomes easier. Yes. So even if they don't want to have a very defined style, like some NPs have found is useful, they still, once they've started to figure out their own criteria, it actually still makes it easier because and I think this is where it's self-imposed criteria, never externally imposed criteria. And this is why they are the biggest style rules are a load of bullshit, people.
Yes, don't fence me in. Yeah.
So that's really something you'll hear a lot from an NP. It's all a load of, bullshit, and you should just throw them all out. There's no such thing. And but when it's internally imposed criteria,
yes,
then it's guidelines and it's useful and it gives them something from which to make a decision on. Because also too, is there an element there with some NPs that they find it very hard to make any decision because there's always more options and I don't want to limit myself. And this is where that they can get stuck even when shopping. And we've seen this where they get stuck when they're going shopping, where they can't make a decision because there may be another pair of pants in the next store. There will always be another pair of pants. Is this really the best option? I don't know, but I'm going to need to go and explore more options. Yeah. So I think this is where developing your own criteria, and this is what we really get deep into our Your Type of Style program, is developing that set of criteria that work for you. And so it's an internally, imposed set of criteria. Now, you may use some external criteria that, like some of the signs of style, like a color palette or a body shape recommendation, all those sorts of things, they can form part of that. But it's not just about that. This is where, I get so many people think, I just need to know my body shape and then I'll have no issues with my style. Yeah, and it's right. You can know your body shape and you still won't be able to shop because you won't be able to decide, well, do I want, this pencil skirt in a floral or a leopard print, or do I want it in a check or a stripe? Do I want it in, an abstract print? The list can go on and on and on, and then suddenly we're still stuck. And this is where that internal criteria comes in, and that until you actually start to delve into these things, you can still get very stuck in, decision making.
Absolutely. An example I have of a wonderful NP that I worked with in San Francisco, not so much as in a formal way, but a friend who asked me for some input on her style was someone who had taken the style rules to extreme. So just had recognized I'm possibilities, I'm options focused. So I need to nail this down. And she had narrowed down her style to it was limited for any, if I think about an extreme version of, say, an ISTJ or other, SJs, ESTJs who like to have a limited palette from which to draw, she'd gone in even more extreme than that. So not recognizing that this need for variety needs to balance and be part of the equation. And this is, again, what we offer in your type of style, is to recognize that where you need to compensate, you never want to go too far away from natural tendency. It's such a gift. That's your strength. That's what you're bringing to the world. That's wonderful. It's also a way to claim who you are. This is why a lot of people find understanding their psychological type so valuable, is where they've either felt out of step or just plain wrong, or they haven't belonged, or any other version of I am not right. Understanding your psychological type can give you back a sense of legitimacy that who I am is perfectly okay. In fact, it's more than perfectly okay. It's wonderful. And so you never want to get too far away from your natural tendencies, but you also want to recognize where you have those blind spots and where they're going to serve you and where they're not. And every one of the 16 style types has strengths in the style arena and blind spots. And so recognizing those, and we use terms like future focused. In fact, one of our modules has a whole section just on future focused wardrobes and how you can use that term to propel your style forward, to build you up. If it's something that is, you're not naturally drawn to or hasn't worked for you, how you can start to fold it in a way that feels safe and right to you, perhaps in a more incremental way. These are all the different conversations you can have about your style when you understand that missing piece, that internal driver, that motivation piece.
So tell me, Jill, as an SJ type, in particular an SFJ type, where future focus is not part of your natural lexicon, how have you thought about this for your own wardrobe?
To me, it comes into wardrobe curation, which is how I think about the process of managing my wardrobe. I am constantly curating my wardrobe. Now, for those of you who think, I have to be dragged into doing that twice a year, to me, it's uplifting, it's fun, it's energizing. I'll often choose it as an evening activity. If we have, my husband's a sporty type. I used to play professional ice hockey. And so if there's a couple of games on that he wants to watch, and, we're not watching a series on Netflix, so I might just choose to spend an evening in my wardrobe. And for me, it's really uplifting. And this whole future focus thing, I've learned just little bits. I have to take it small, slow and steady, which is probably an anathema how those naturally drawn to it, which is, they're just there. It's learned. It's completely learned for me. And this sense of, just because it worked in the past, I'm just so there. That is not even a question I need to ask, because that question surrounds me. It's like the water that the fish is swimming in. So for me, I have to ask that question of, is this still serving me? I start with today, the me I am now, and then looking into what I see of the future, which for me is kind of hard to see. I planned for it, but I can't see it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you've talked about like that you're already planning outfits for later in the year. So you have sort of...
I'm planning it for November 7. I'm not planning it for the future. I'm planning it for November 7.
November 7 is the future, Jill.
But it's not. Well, it is. It's in the future, but it's not the future. It's different.
Ah, interesting. So it's what is the future?
That's right. See, I don't know what the future is. I have specific little things, boxes in a calendar that are in something called the future.
Interesting. So even though you're planning for the future, you don't think about it in a broad global way. So it's that small detail focus rather than any sort of big picture of where I want to be or what type of person I'm going to be. But you have talked about when you are planning those outfits for the future, even though it's November 7, that
It
you
was for
still,
a future event, which is not for the. I'm sorry, I'm not hair splitting, but it's a distinction. So I'm not planning for the future. I'm planning for an event in the future.
but but you've still talked about how that you're still thinking about, well, what do I want to be communicating and what's the audience? So you are thinking about all those same sort of questions that I might think about if I'm thinking about the future.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just yours a very specific, detailed future versus mine's a big, blurry future.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where people get tripped up when they think they don't know what their type is, because I think, oh yeah, I think about the future. I've known SJs who say, yeah, I think about the future. And all you had to do is ask them like 3 questions. It's like, no, well, you are, but it's really different to how an NJ or an NP or even an SP, it's really different to their attitude, orientation towards comfort levels, ability to communicate what it is and what it isn't. So it has a completely different complexion. All of us think about the future. We have to.
Yeah.
Life forces us to be present in the current moment, have some access to the past, and have an eye on the future. Life forces us to do that, but we don't do it in equal thirds. We're not equally good at each one of those. We're not naturally oriented towards all of those things. All you have to do is to just listen into normal conversation, which is also how type is real, because you hear it in conversations where people will say the past is dead, the past is irrelevant, and other people go, "Are you kidding me?" The past tells us everything we need to know about the future. They're really different, really different.
They are very different, aren't they? And it is something to think about. It's, what is the future to you? How do you envisage the future? Where is your wardrobe taking you? You can just think about that one question we talked about is, can I imagine wearing this in the future?
Yeah.
Is this the future me I want to be?
Yeah.
Because that is often, one of the things I find when we are culling wardrobes is often these, it's been a favorite and I've loved it,
Mm.
But maybe it's not me anymore. It's not
Yeah.
the future version. And even when you are buying clothes too, in particular, to go, well, is this going to be working for my real future lifestyle rather than my fantasy future lifestyle? Because we've all bought some fantasy future lifestyle pieces in our lives, I think. But, if that's something that if you realize you get things home for a fantasy future lifestyle, that might be something worth really thinking about. And that's why our program is so great, because it gives you this opportunity in a structured way to ask a lot of questions about, how you are thinking about your wardrobe, what you're bringing in, and hopefully start to make you more aware so those mistakes stop happening.
And the other great thing about your type of style is the Facebook group. Women of all of the 16 style types have participated in the program. And so you get to see what other women are sharing about their journey. And it can be so illuminating, because we can either have this sense of kinship. Oh, great, somebody else is approaching this in a way that I can relate to, similar to me. The opposite can happen, where we think that is so different, but isn't that awesome and amazing? We get to see those strengths, and true, we also see the blind spots that come through. It's a very safe, but also very stimulating place. And of course, you share as much or as little as you like on the Facebook group. It's up to you. But it's a really wonderful opportunity to see these differences in action in a way that is respectful and welcoming of those differences, particularly if you've thought, so much of what I read on style, it's 10 things I've got to have, or, how to wear this thing that I absolutely freaking loathe and wouldn't wear if it was the last item of clothing on earth. You can often think, well, look, there's nothing out there that is really for me, unless you've been reading Imogen's style blog. And so, that's what's another great thing about the program, is just meeting other women who approach style in their unique way, who are being welcomed and appreciated and reinforced for who they are and how they're approaching their style.
Yeah, and I think you can just notice in our conversation how we as different types approach things in different ways, and getting that understanding. And I think this helps in families too. Like, generally our kids are not exactly the same type as us. And so even being able to see people of a same or similar type to your own children or family members can also foster greater understanding. I think that's one of the joys of types, is it helps you go, this is not that person trying to annoy me, or that person, wanting to wear something, like, especially I've seen it with mothers and children, where she's trying to wear things that, and I don't think they're right. Actually, she is a very different type, and her approach to style is very different. And now I've seen other people of a similar type, and they all go about it that way. It suddenly fosters an understanding that otherwise wasn't there, that just can bring so much, joy to relationships, I think.
Yeah, you can let down some of the burdens that you carry around, some of those untested assumptions that can really trip you up and get in the way of having a clearer, healthier, happier relationship with other people. I mean, honestly, it's like gold dust. To me, it's magic. You sprinkle it over almost anything in your life, and it illuminates it in a way that it was never illuminated before. That's not to say type is the answer to everything. Of course it isn't. It's not designed to be. But when it is applied in the right way, it is a gift.
Yeah. So we'd love to know your thoughts on a future focus. What does a future focus wardrobe mean to you? Do you have got the fantasy future, a future for the next week rather than next year, or a future in 30 years' time? Where are you thinking about your wardrobe taking you?